trying to break through for.
See previous answer. I mean, show business doesn't, you don't choose it, it chooses you. And show business is not looking for people that want to do this, looking for people that must do this. And I've often said the greatest thing anybody can be blessed with is an obsession. And it's kind of like you put on the shoes and the shoes do the walking for you. You're just going along for the ride. And, kids will come up and say, hey man, give me some advice, how do I get into business? And I just tell them, I go, listen, if you don't think you can live without it, go for it. Better to try and fail than turn 50 or 60 and look yourself in the mirror and go, well, I didn't because I didn't have the guts or the motivation or whatever. But on the other hand, if you think for one moment you can live without it, you better seek another line of employment. You will not. This is not for the faint of heart. Yes, sir.
I've got two quick questions. The first question is, what song helped you find your signature vocal sound? Was there a certain song when you were younger, something you listened to, that made you kind of latch on to that this kind of distorted vocal that you have?
I was in a cover band when I was in high school, and I was playing, when I was 15, I was as tall as I am now, and I developed pretty early. I mean, by the time I was 16, I had a full-grown beard. So when I was 15, I had sideburns down here. I was playing with guys that were 10 years older than me. And so I was not singing lead at the time. I was singing 2 songs a night lead. We had another guy that was singing lead. Well, he got fired. I got thrown out of the boat, and it became my job. We were doing 63 songs a night in our repertoire. You start at 8 in the evening, go to 4 in the morning, you're gonna develop something. And that's really where I learned it right there. I mean, the word that comes to mind is attrition. You get tough or die. And I don't think anybody really, well, I don't know if I can speak for everyone, but of the guys I know, nobody sets out to sound like anybody else. You just do your thing, and whatever comes out, comes out. So it really is no more complicated than that. I mean, in my particular case, like I said, it was baptism by fire.
My second question was kind of mirroring faith coming in and out. What was it that brought you back to that?
A search of 20 years. I call it my Lieutenant Dan moment.
Like a reflection?
Well, when he's up in the crow's nest and the hurricane's coming and Gary Sinise shakes his fist at God and he goes, it's you and me, right here, right now. Well, that was kind of what I did. And, I determined I was either going to get the monkey off my back or I was going to live with it. And I spent 6 months reading the New Testament, trying my best to disprove it. And I came to the conclusion after 6 months that Christ was either a liar, a lunatic, or he was the Lord. And I came to the conclusion he was the latter of the three. Yes, sir.
So I just got to thank you, first of all, for being the soundtrack to most of my life. But kind of following on his question, when you started becoming more, I guess, open in your lyrical being with the spiritual part of it, were you getting a lot of encouragement or more discouragement?
Neither. I had this conversation with Alice Cooper a few years ago, and we both said that we were kind of aware early on in our early records that we were writing that stuff, but we didn't realize, neither one of us realized how overt it was until years later. Because he too was brought up in the same environment I was brought up in, so that influence is always going to be there. And like I said, for him, we compared notes, and it was almost like we were reading off the same script, so it really wasn't different. Yes, ma'am.
If you could form a super band today, who would you choose to be in your band?
Super bands go super egos.
Yeah.
It's hard to get them all in the same room at the same time. I have been in a situation, and I won't tell you when, but there was one point in my career where we were taking 4 different modes of transportation, 4 different dressing rooms, 4 different entrances and exits to the stage. We did not see each other until the lights went up for the show, and we did not see each other again until the lights went out
Wow.
and came on again for the next show. So to say that you're living a miserable existence is kind of like calling King Kong a monkey. You know, it's.
Have you ever thought about playing with Vinnie Vincent?
I don't know him. I've never met him. You know, I know people that have worked with him, and you know, they have varying ideas of it. But to answer your question, yes, sir.
I don't have a question.
First, I say, like,
Ukraine.
yeah, Blackie on the Black Friday. Does
I know,
that
right?
any better?
Yeah.
With so much material to choose from to fit into 2 hours, yet the larger portion of it is from your first album. Can you comment on that, or?
We spent actually probably better part of a year trying to figure out what we were going to do in this. We started out with somewhere between 40 and 50 songs, and we just kept narrowing it down, narrowing it down. And quite honestly, it was not until the last day of rehearsal before we did the first show in Las Vegas that we settled on a set list. Because you're trying to take an average of what you think people are going to want to hear, but it's difficult. You know, I mean, I've told this story before. I mean, you get some fans that want to hear obscure B-sides. And we did that once. We thought, okay, you know, we'll try that and see what happens. And so we were in the Netherlands, and we went out and did 4 obscure B-sides. And died a horrible death right there. And I said, well, we did it. We're never going to do this again. You know. So I said, all right. Well, you know, from now on, let's try to take an average of what you think people are going to want to hear. Yes, sir.
Hey, Still Not Black Enough is one of your best albums, in my opinion. How did you like the way it turned out? And
I was a period in my life where I was lost as a goat.
right before KFD.
Yeah, because I had just come out of the Idol, and I was still in the glow or the shadow, if you know, of the Idol. I went into it with a fatal attitude, thinking there's no way I can top that previous record. And that's a bad starting spot.
Well, it turned out awesome.
Well, it's better than, now being able to look back on it, it's better than I gave it credit for. But it's kind of like, you know, your mom told you when you're growing up, if you never tell a lie, you never have to worry about telling the truth. If you're going through a situation where you just, it's kind of like fumbling in the dark. You're reaching for something, you don't know what you're reaching for. You know, I don't want to repeat the Idol. I can't repeat the Idol. You know, so what do I do? You know, so it wasn't until Chris and I got back together right after that record and we did KFD, I found myself again. You know, so I think any artist you talk to is going to have moments like that where they're just kind of floating and they don't really know who they are or where they're going. I missed you in the back there.
Me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, is Hollywood as horrific as most people say that are in the music industry, movie industry, and so on and so forth?
Can be.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Because I know it'll break people.
oh, it does. It's famous for it. You can't get a part without an agent. You can't get an agent without a part. How do you solve that conundrum? It is designed to weed people out. Again, I'll use the word attrition. It's designed to weed people out who should not be there. Back in the 80s, there was a Hollywood Chamber of Commerce statistic that stated there was a teenage girl came to Hollywood once every 13 seconds. That did not include the guys or the guys and the girls over 20. That was just a teenage girl. And the average life expectancy was 6 months. Now that's not a mortality rate. That's just before they packed up and went home. Because you got to remember, these kids are all voted most likely to whatever in high school. And they all think they're gonna go to that place and bowl it over. And what they don't realize is they're dealing with every type A personality that is in the United States or around the world for that matter. And they all congregate in that place. And the competition is enormously fierce. And most of them, going back to the question that was asked earlier, you know, when I was talking about show business doesn't choose you. I mean, you don't choose it, it chooses you. That's really what they find out. It's like, how do you endure it? You know, I lived in a closet that was 3 feet by 12 feet for over a year. And I recently heard George Clooney tell the same exact story. He was living about a mile away from me and I didn't know it. He too was living in a closet for over a year. How many people are willing to do that, and where you don't know where your next meal is coming from? I went for 3 years without gas and without electricity. That's a long time. And you don't know where your next meal is coming from. But you've got your eyes on the prize, and if you believe in yourself, the race does not always go to the swiftest. You know, to me, I always looked at it like the tortoise and the hare. You know, you beat me in a sprint, but I'll kill you in a marathon. You know, so it really does come down to how badly somebody wants it, or do they think they can or cannot live it out. It's that simple. Yes, sir.
I was reading Nikki Sixx's latest book, and he mentioned you are a Beatles fan. I just wondered, who's your favorite Beatle, and what's your favorite Beatles album?
That's impossible to choose. Do you have kids?
No.
Well, that I would say pick your favorite kid, but you know, that's impossible. I mean, we were in New York City last weekend, week ago tonight actually, and we drove through the city, and we drove by the old Ed Sullivan Theater, and I told the guys, I said, you see that theater right there? Where I grew up, as the crow flies, was 12 miles away from me, over in Staten Island. I was there when all that was going on. I was 7 years old, and the earthquake that it caused, there's never been anything like it before or since. So like I said, trying to decipher that or to differentiate and choose one, impossible. Yes, ma'am.
Your favorite song to perform?
I'm sorry, what?
Your favorite song to perform, what's yours?
That's that desert island question that journalists ask us over. Got to pick 5 records on the desert island. It's whatever I'm in the mood in at the time, you know. I mean, it's like I have average taste, like everybody else. I like the same movies, same music, same food as everybody else. You know, it's not real average, you know. So I just, like I said, whatever mood I'm in at the time. Yes, sir.
Hey,
Mm-hmm.
going back off the previous question, when you said you had your Lieutenant Dan moment when you decided to be, born again. Did that have anything to do, like a lot of the songs that you wrote and performed, about world events and current events and stuff like that that's gone on, 9/11?
Yeah, probably. But at the same time, you got to remember, we're in the Bible Belt here, so you guys know what it's all about. I had an uncle that was a preacher, and then my dad was a Sunday school superintendent. My grandfather was a deacon, so every time the doors was open, I was there. So you grow up with that influence. But equally important, I think, with that is just me as being average. I'll watch TV, and the same stuff that pisses me off pisses you off. I see injustices and I hate it. I can't stand it. And so if I'm motivated by it, especially motivated enough to write about it, there's a pretty fair chance it's going to resonate with you as well. So that I've often